There's something about one last trip that never sounds right. It lingers, like a whisper before a scream. Veronica Haynes told her daughter it would be their final weekend together as a family. One last memory with Lucas, her former lover, the man she could never quite let go. But somewhere between the open road and the tree line at Willow Grove, that weekend vanished. And so did they. No one heard a cry. No one saw a struggle. Just a parked car, a stuffed animal, and silence. What if your need for closure leads you straight into danger? Have you ever made a decision out of loneliness that you'd never make in the light of day? Veronica was looking for peace. Instead, she and Clara were swallowed by a forest that never gave them back. Comment below, do you think she planned to disappear, or just never had the chance to come home? Brackenridge never needed headlines to feel watched. The town was the kind of place where the sea brushed the land quietly, and neighbors counted porch lights as proof that life was still where it should be. People didn't lock their doors out of habit. They did it because stories lingered longer than facts. Veronica Haynes had grown up there. The house she returned to after her separation still smelled faintly of lavender and old varnish. From the outside it was well kept. On the inside, it held a silence that seemed to grow thicker with each legal battle. She'd once been the type to argue passionately and laugh too loud at dinners. Those traits faded during court hearings, replaced by the measured voice of someone who'd learned that sincerity could be twisted against her. Friends described her in those days as distant but trying to stay afloat, trying to prove something, maybe even trying to feel wanted again. The custody battle with her ex-husband was brutal, not in volume but in its quiet wear down. Veronica was painted as unpredictable, emotional, a woman who lived in the past. She didn't fight with rage, she fought with restraint, and that restraint cost her ground. Clara, her daughter, had become the one thing she felt she could still protect. But the pressure didn't just press against her, it carved into her. Lucas Merritt came back into her life the way some people do, not entirely welcomed but not fully resisted either. They had history. Not all of it was good. He'd been the kind of man who could switch from charm to withdrawal without warning, which always left you wondering whether the problem was you. He had a quiet intensity that drew people in. He also had a record, not criminal but behavioral. Veronica never shared details, just said, "He wasn't who I needed back then." Still, when he called one night out of nowhere and asked how she was holding up, she didn't hang up. Over the next few weeks, he visited a few times. They took walks by the shore. Clara, unaware of the deeper currents, seemed to warm to him. She liked the way he told stories. She liked how he never spoke to her like a child. Veronica noticed that. She also noticed how Clara would sometimes glance at him, as if waiting for a mood to shift. Clara had started writing in a diary, small pages filled with stars, questions, and scribbled animals. Most of it was innocent, but some pages were harder to interpret. One entry mentioned that her mother talks to the trees when she's sad. Another read, "Lucas laughs but sometimes his eyes don't." It wasn't alarming enough to report, but it left a question hanging in the background. Was Clara noticing things Veronica had trained herself to ignore? Nathan, Veronica's new partner, was the opposite of Lucas. Steady, present, not interested in being dramatic or poetic. He worked in town maintenance and coached youth soccer on weekends. He met Veronica when she was shopping for supplies to fix a broken cabinet door. Their relationship moved slowly, Veronica insisted on it. She needed time. Nathan gave her that. He also gave her warnings. "You don't owe your past anything," he told her once when she mentioned Lucas had been back in town. But Veronica wasn't interested in lectures. She said Lucas understood parts of her Nathan never would. She announced the trip casually, 2 nights at Meridian Cove. She called it a reset. Said Clara needed fresh air and she needed time to think. Nathan offered to go with them. She declined. "It's something I need to do myself," she said, holding a suitcase she had already packed. The idea of a final weekend with her ex, her child, and her own complicated past didn't sit well with anyone close to her. Friends exchanged looks but didn't press. Nathan was less subtle. "This feels wrong," he told her bluntly. "If something's not settled, this won't fix it." Veronica didn't argue. She just nodded and said, "I know what I'm doing." The day they left, Brackenridge felt off-kilter. Not because of a storm or an accident. Just a general quiet that people would later try to explain away. The blue station wagon with its chipping paint pulled out of Veronica's driveway mid-afternoon. Clara waved from the back seat, her rabbit plush tucked under one arm. Lucas drove. Veronica sat beside him, window cracked just enough to let the breeze in. Neighbors later said Veronica looked focused. Not sad, not angry, just like someone who had already made a decision. A few claimed they saw her lean over to Lucas at a stop sign and smile in a way that felt rehearsed. Others noticed Clara's face, pressed against the glass, staring at the trees as they passed. As the car disappeared down the hill, Nathan stood outside his truck, arms folded. He didn't wave. He just watched. In the hours that followed, the town settled into its usual rhythm. Shops closed early. The sun dipped behind the hills. Nobody could have known that Veronica and Clara would never return, not because of fate or accident, but because whatever was set in motion that afternoon wasn't meant to reverse. The road to Meridian Cove cut through old farmlands and thickets that hadn't been cleared in years. It was a stretch of space that made silence feel heavier. No cameras. No crowds. Just land that had seen more departures than arrivals. No one could say for sure when the tone of the trip shifted. But somewhere between Brackenridge and the last recorded location at Willow Grove, something changed. Something essential. Something final. The highway stretched long and open, framed by low hills and stretches of golden brush. The station wagon rolled steadily forward, engine humming like an old song. In the back seat, Clara traced lines on the window with her finger. She hummed to herself and occasionally held her stuffed rabbit up to the light. Veronica turned around to smile, her expression soft but weighted. Lucas drove with both hands on the wheel, his jaw tight. He wasn't much for small talk. Veronica filled the silence with gentle conversation. Stories about the last time she'd been to Meridian Cove, memories from their youth, half-forgotten stops and cafes that might still be standing. Lucas nodded, sometimes offering a word or two. Clara giggled once when Veronica made a joke about Sang getting into peanut butter sandwiches. The laughter came and went like a breeze, brief but not empty. The closer they got to the tree line, the quieter it all became. Lucas adjusted the radio once, cycling through static and old music before settling on nothing. Clara leaned forward between the seats and asked how much longer. Veronica reached back and squeezed her knee. "Not far," she said. "We'll stop soon." They pulled into Willow Grove just before sunset. The parking area was nearly empty. The last rays of light cut low across the clearing, casting a soft glow over the grass and tree trunks. The station wagon slowed and stopped near the edge of the wooded area, tires crunching over gravel. No one spoke for a moment. Then Lucas got out and stretched. Veronica followed, glancing at the trees like she was looking for something, or someone, she expected to be there. Clara stayed inside a little longer. Eventually, she slid out of the back seat, her rabbit dangling in one hand. Veronica walked around to meet her and took her other hand. Lucas stood near the front of the car, watching. They walked together toward the trees. A maintenance worker at a nearby fuel station remembered seeing the car. He'd stepped outside to smoke and noticed the vehicle parked near the tree line. Lights on. Engine off. People moving, briefly. He thought they were just passing through. He remembered the woman and child. Didn't get a clear look at the man. He told police he had a strange feeling, one of those things you can't explain. Like someone was about to speak but didn't. He waited a few minutes. The car stayed there, unmoving. Eventually he went back inside. That was the last time anyone saw Veronica or Clara. Security footage from a highway toll booth time-stamped their exit from Brackenridge. Another camera, closer to the rest stop, showed the wagon pulling off the main road, but the image was grainy. Trees blurred the background. There were no other vehicles around. Nothing suggested a struggle, but nothing suggested safety either. Just stillness. What struck investigators wasn't what they saw, but what they didn't. No one reported seeing the group return to the car. No witnesses reported further movement. The car remained for hours, unnoticed by most, until a patrol unit checked the lot the next morning after a call from Veronica's sister. The vehicle was empty. The keys were gone. Phones unreachable. Later analysis found no fingerprints beyond the expected. No struggle inside the car. No signs of injury or distress. Only a single child's jacket left on the back seat and a folded receipt from a small roadside diner 3 towns away. Lucas's phone showed a handful of calls, some routine, others missed. One message stood out, a string of coordinates and a question mark. Investigators couldn't determine where it came from. It wasn't linked to any known number. Veronica's phone had gone dark hours earlier. Clara's was left behind, tucked into her backpack. She hadn't taken it with her. Nathan would later tell detectives that he felt the weight of something unspoken that afternoon. He said, "She told me it wasn't goodbye, but it felt like it." He paused. "She didn't hug me. Just said, 'This is something I need to finish.' No one knows what she meant by that. Would you have gone on that trip?" Let us know what your gut says in the comments. Detective Marlon Rivera stepped into the case with quiet focus. He wasn't new to missing persons, but something about the details gave him pause. He started with the last confirmed location, Willow Grove, where the station wagon had sat untouched for nearly 12 hours before police were alerted. From there, he worked outward, backtracking every lead, every phone call, every silent space between known facts. Nathan agreed to speak with him first. His hands were clenched throughout the interview, not out of aggression but restraint. She wasn't confused, he said. Veronica knew exactly what she was doing. She just didn't think she'd have to explain it to anyone. Rivera pressed him gently, asking if he suspected Lucas of anything. Nathan's response came quickly. Yes, I always did. But not because I thought he'd hurt her. He was unstable. He could look calm and be somewhere else entirely. That kind of quiet can make people nervous. He paused. It made me nervous. Friends of Veronica echoed similar feelings. One mentioned that she'd become distant in the weeks leading up to the trip. She stopped answering calls. Barely replied to texts. It felt like she was wrapping things up, emotionally, like packing up a part of her life she didn't plan to bring back. Another said Veronica had spoken vaguely about needing clarity, about closing a chapter that had dragged on too long. Lucas, when asked about the trip during a previous conversation with a mutual acquaintance, had reportedly called it an overdue goodbye. That choice of words stuck with Rivera. He reviewed surveillance footage from the toll plaza an hour outside Brackenridge. The station wagon entered at 3:42 p.m. The next available recording came from a tunnel camera located just before the cutoff road leading to Willow Grove. That footage, captured at 4:19 p.m., was distorted. Light bounced off the windshield, blurring the faces. The car was identified by its plates, but nothing inside was clearly visible. No one could say if Veronica was driving or if she was even awake. Rivera ordered a second scan of nearby cameras, some older, privately owned by local businesses. One showed the back of the wagon making a right turn onto a dirt path, consistent with the entrance to Willow Grove. Time stamped, 4:27 p.m. A tip came from a gas station clerk 3 towns north. He told officers a man matching Lucas's description had pulled in late that evening with a little girl in the passenger seat. The man didn't buy fuel, just snacks and bottled water. He looked like he was in a hurry. Eyes kept moving. Not talking to the girl much, the clerk said. He remembered the child was quiet. He couldn't confirm if it was Clara. Rivera checked the store's security footage. The angle only showed the man entering and exiting. The passenger side of the vehicle remained out of view. The timing of the sighting didn't rule out the possibility that Veronica had still been with them, just not visible. Still, the lead introduced the idea that the group may have briefly separated. Whether voluntary or forced was still unclear. Back in Brackenridge, police searched Veronica's house. Inside a wooden box under her bed, they found a worn leather-bound journal. Her handwriting was careful, sometimes slanted like she'd been writing in a rush. One page stood out. She'd written, "There's a cost to starting over. It's not just what you leave behind, it's what you decide can't come with you." Further pages hinted at emotional fatigue, but no clear intent to vanish. No mention of running. No mention of harm. Just scattered thoughts on motherhood, custody courtrooms, and the ache of decisions she wasn't sure she'd made for the right reasons. In Clara's bedroom, officers found her diary tucked between books on a low shelf. It was filled with crayon sketches of her stuffed rabbit and notes to her mother. One entry read, "Lucas is nice when he's happy." Another, "Mama says the trees will listen if I talk to them first." Rivera underlined that line in his own notes. It didn't prove anything, but it felt personal in a way that made silence harder to ignore. He started building a timeline. The wagon leaves Brackenridge in the afternoon. It arrives at Willow Grove before dusk. No confirmed sightings afterward, except possibly the gas station. Phones go dark. Veronica's contact with her lawyer ends the day before. Lucas's activity drops to almost nothing. No bank card use. No messages. No camera hits beyond that gas station. A neighbor remembered seeing Veronica sitting on her porch the night before they left. She'd been quiet, writing something in a small notebook, occasionally glancing toward the street. She looked finished, the neighbor said, like someone who'd packed everything they were willing to lose. Rivera kept returning to that phrase. Willing to lose. Was this a woman trying to reclaim her life? Or was she giving it up? Another friend told police that Veronica had received legal counsel from a firm that dealt with custody disputes and relocation cases. The firm declined to release details, citing confidentiality. But a receptionist confirmed that Veronica had been in touch. She'd asked about exit protocols, how to remove herself from an unstable domestic environment. That raised the stakes. Was she planning to leave the country with Clara? Or was she protecting herself from someone who might have taken that step from her? Rivera circled back to Lucas. Public records showed no prior charges. But there were patterns, short-term jobs, sudden moves, women who wouldn't talk about why things ended. One former roommate described him as intense without warning. He would go from calm to distant in an instant, isolating himself for days. Another said he once threw a mug across a kitchen wall, not during a fight, just in the middle of a conversation. That instability wasn't enough for a warrant, but it filled in the space between facts with questions. A week into the investigation, a call came from a woman who claimed she'd spoken with Veronica just days before the trip. They'd met at a public library, both waiting for their children to finish an art class. She remembered Veronica mentioning a place called Meridian Cove. When the woman asked why they were going there, Veronica said, "To remember who I used to be." That line lingered with Rivera. If Veronica was chasing something, peace, identity, or closure, was she prepared to disappear to get it? Or had she underestimated the consequences of bringing Clara and Lucas into that plan? None of the answers were easy, and none came with certainty. A few days after the gas station sighting, Rivera walked the Willow Grove site again. The light had shifted since his first visit. The grass was wet from overnight rain. He paced near the edge of the wooded path, scanning for anything overlooked. That's when he saw it. Nestled in a shallow patch of soil, half covered in dead leaves, was a small silver charm, oval-shaped, dulled with time. A delicate vine pattern curled around engraved letters, Vich. It matched descriptions from a friend of Veronica's, who said she'd worn a charm like that on a necklace during difficult phases of her life. She called it her anchor, a gift from her college roommate after a miscarriage she never spoke about publicly. Rivera sealed the charm and logged it. He wasn't sure what it meant yet, only that it hadn't been there on the first sweep. Whether it had fallen unnoticed or had been placed after the fact, it told him one thing. Someone had returned after the initial disappearance. Whether to leave a message or erase a detail, he couldn't say. The next wave of discovery came not from Brackenridge, but across county lines. Rivera tracked down Lucas's older brother in a town just west of the state border. His name was Thomas. Reluctant at first, Thomas agreed to speak under the condition that the interview not be recorded. Lucas was always different, he began, shifting in his seat. He used to take the blame for things he didn't do, like he needed to feel guilty. Or Dad, he was rough. You grow up under that long enough, it warps you. Thomas shared that Lucas had a history of internalizing blame. He'd disappear for days during his teenage years, never explaining where he went. There was one time, when he was 16, that he locked himself in their garage after learning an old girlfriend had moved away without telling him. He never threatened anything, Thomas said, but you could feel something in the air, like he was trying to hold back an explosion from his own thoughts. When asked about Veronica, Thomas paused. She loved him. Not blindly, but she believed he could be better. That's why she stayed longer than she should have. Back in Brackenridge, Rivera received an anonymous email with an attachment, scans of handwritten notes and business cards linked to a private investigation firm. No name, no return address. The firm was real. When contacted, they hesitated to confirm a client's identity but eventually acknowledged working with someone named Veronica Haynes. A partner at the firm, under pressure, admitted she'd requested information on legal custody relocation, identity change logistics, and international travel restrictions for minors. She was careful, the partner noted. Didn't say she was running, just asked what it would involve if she ever needed to. This confirmed what Rivera had started to suspect. Veronica might not have been just reacting to stress. She may have been planning something, carefully, quietly. Whether for protection, freedom, or something else entirely wasn't yet clear. Clara's diary, once dismissed as childhood whimsy, was pulled again from evidence. Rivera spent hours reading it page by page. One entry stood out in red crayon, tucked between drawings of trees and clouds. Mama said the trees whisper secrets you can't forget. But only if you're really listening. Rivera sat with that line longer than he wanted to. Clara's entries started to shift after Lucas returned to their lives. The sentences lost some of their innocence. Another page read, "Lucas looks at Mama like a story I don't understand." And another, "She cries when I'm asleep. I know because I hear it." These weren't just the child's observations, they were signs of change. Emotional shifts no one around her had picked up on. Or maybe they had and didn't want to. As more threads emerged, another contact reached out. A paralegal from the firm Veronica had contacted agreed to meet privately. She said Veronica made a second call weeks after the first, asking about the legal limits of self-protection in custody battles. She was nervous but not panicked. More like, she had one shot left to fix everything. This was no impulsive trip. Something had been building step by step. But the question remained, was she truly planning to disappear? Or was she preparing for something she feared might be forced upon her? Rivera revisited Nathan, asking if Veronica had ever hinted at escape. Nathan looked down for a moment, then replied, "Not directly. But once, during a late conversation, she said she couldn't keep fighting people who had more resources than she did. She said if she ever had to go, it would be her choice, not theirs." That line echoed against everything else. If it was her choice, was Lucas part of the plan, or part of the reason she had to make one? Lucas's personal bank records showed no suspicious transactions. No large withdrawals. No tickets purchased. But Rivera discovered an older contact of his. A woman he briefly lived with in a mountain town 4 years ago. She agreed to speak off record. "Lucas is the type of man who hides guilt until it turns into silence," she said. He never wanted to be the cause of someone else's downfall, but he couldn't stop himself from becoming it. When pressed, she admitted Lucas once mentioned feeling like he'd messed up someone's life so badly, the only thing left was to give them a fresh start. Rivera asked if Lucas ever mentioned Veronica. She nodded. He said she was the only one who ever made him feel like he deserved to be better. Back in the station, Rivera pored over the case notes. The charm. The gas station tip. The journal entries. The legal inquiries. Each detail was concrete on its own but shifted depending on how you arranged them. One theory grew harder to ignore. Veronica had prepared to vanish, not in fear but in strategy. A last resort. One she may have rehearsed for months. Yet if that were true, why leave the car? Why leave her daughter's belongings behind? Why not erase more? Unless someone disrupted the plan. Or misunderstood it. Or changed it for her. Rivera couldn't confirm what came first, the intent or the interruption. As he closed the last page of Clara's diary again, he noticed a final drawing. A tall tree with 2 small figures standing beneath it. No faces. Just shapes. And between them, a winding line that could have been a path. Or a crack. The longer he stared, the more it resembled both. 2 weeks into the investigation, a thread broke loose in the most unlikely place. A photography forum for local hobbyists. A user posted a series of twilight shots taken near the edge of Willow Grove. Most were harmless. Fog, trees, silhouettes of deer in the distance. One, however, stood out. It showed the narrow path leading into the woods. Caught near the edge of the frame were 2 faint figures. A woman and a child, holding hands. The image was grainy, stretched at the edges by low light and a cheap lens, but there was something unmistakable in the posture of the smaller figure. A slouched shoulder, the slight tilt of the head. Clara had a habit of leaning slightly left when tired. Her teachers at school had mentioned it during parent-teacher conferences. The timestamp placed the photo about 90 minutes after the last known phone signal from Veronica's number. The location matched an unmarked trail just past the rest stop's boundary. Rivera dispatched a team to follow the path in the photo. They moved slowly, measuring each turn against the trees captured in the frame. After nearly a mile, they reached a clearing where the grass gave way to compacted soil. Ashes were scattered near a blackened rock. Bits of melted wax clung to its edges. A blanket was half buried under leaves, floral, faded, unmistakably feminine. There was also a piece of drawing paper folded into a plastic bag, likely to keep it dry. On it, a child had scribbled 2 figures beside a small fire. No words. Just shapes and color. The blanket matched one that had been missing from Veronica's home. The wax was from a candle she'd purchased in Brackenridge weeks earlier, part of a small order picked up using a debit card under her name. The team marked the area and secured the items. Forensics confirmed the blanket carried traces of Veronica's DNA. A hair strand on the drawing matched Clara. No trace of Lucas at the site, at least not in the materials found. The evidence suggested they'd stayed there. For how long, no one could say. But the fire, the blanket, the drawing, it all pointed to survival beyond the point of disappearance. Which changed everything. Had Veronica brought them here by design? Or had Lucas brought them and left them? Rivera returned to the drawing repeatedly. There were no signs of distress in the figures. The lines were clean. The colors soft. The child who drew it didn't appear to be in fear. That could mean safety or resignation. Without context, it was hard to say. He visited Veronica's friend, the one who had first described the charm found earlier. She said Veronica kept her most private thoughts in sketches, not journals. She never felt safe putting feelings into full sentences. Said it made things too real. That insight made the drawing more than a child's pastime. It was documentation. A record of presence, not panic. The discovery reframed the last known movements of the trio. If they made it to the clearing, and if Veronica was still alive at that point, she may have chosen the location. She may have led Clara down that path. She may have lit the fire herself. Still, one question pressed harder than the rest. Why no return? If they were hiding, why leave behind evidence? If they were trying to disappear, why stop so close to the highway? If Veronica had a plan, why had it gone silent? Rivera scanned Clara's diary again. One of the final entries came after the drawings had become darker, more confused. Written in pencil, faint and barely legible, it said, "Mama said the trees tell secrets." Just that. No follow-up. No explanation. He shared the line with a psychologist familiar with trauma narratives in children. She said it sounded like a metaphor Veronica might have used to help Clara cope. A way of saying, pay attention to what feels unspoken. She added that when children sense decisions being made around them, ones they don't fully understand, they turn to nature or play to translate it. To Rivera, it sounded like Veronica had been preparing Clara. Preparing her to understand a reality she couldn't say aloud. He returned to the clearing with the photograph in hand, staring at the trail that disappeared into deeper woods. There were no more clues nearby, no bags, no footprints, no discarded items. Just the remains of a fire, a forgotten drawing, and silence. Every search beyond that space had turned up nothing. Back at the station, Rivera compiled a new working theory. Veronica and Clara had made it there together. They stayed briefly, perhaps overnight. Either Lucas left them there or they left him behind. Either they vanished deeper by choice, or something interrupted the plan entirely. He wasn't willing to say which. One final note came from a local librarian who had spoken to Veronica in the weeks before the trip. She remembered Veronica checking out a series of books on off-grid survival and personal safety. "She asked me about wilderness maps and how far a person could walk in a day," the librarian recalled. "It didn't strike me as odd until now." That detail cast more light on the possibility that Veronica had mapped out a path. To leave, to disappear, to build something new away from courts and conflict. But the pieces still resisted certainty. Was Lucas involved in executing that plan, or did he dismantle it? Was the camp a stop on a journey, or its final chapter? Was Clara's last message a cryptic child's memory, or a clue only her mother could have fully understood? Rivera left the site with more questions than answers. But one truth stood tall in the middle of it all. The clearing wasn't an accident. It was chosen. And someone at some point had intended to return. Detective Rivera returned to the station with the blanket, the wax remnants, the drawing, and more questions than answers. His whiteboard was filled with arrows, names, dates, but no clear conclusion. Each lead had led him closer to something, but that something never stood still long enough to define. In interviews he spoke calmly. In his notebook, his pen dug harder with each entry. Theories ran in circles. Some suggested Veronica staged it all to escape the system. Others swore Lucas manipulated her into it. A few pointed fingers in both directions. Rivera hated speculation. He preferred facts. But facts had grown thin. His frustration wasn't loud. It didn't fill rooms or raise voices. It showed up in the way he stayed late without telling anyone. The way he kept rereading Clara's final diary entries like there might be one word he'd missed. Or in the way he sat, motionless, in front of the photograph of the figures entering the woods, playing the scene back over and over in his mind without resolution. In town, silence became its own kind of ritual. People stopped asking what really happened out loud. Instead, they speculated in glances and unfinished sentences. Some believed Veronica was still alive. Others believed Lucas had vanished with them, maybe to another state, another country. One rumor clung harder than most, that Lucas had ties to an identity fraud ring years ago and knew how to disappear. There had never been formal charges. Just quiet mentions in an old file from a fraud investigation that didn't go far. None of it was enough to make an arrest. None of it cleared the fog. Veronica's journal made its way into public knowledge when a friend who had helped clean her home spoke to a local reporter. Excerpts were published. Some readers saw it as a desperate cry for help. Others interpreted it as a blueprint for freedom. Her words weren't direct. They were layered. She wrote about feeling like time had closed in around her, Like every decision she'd made since the custody battle had chipped away at her sense of self. To leave behind the version of me this town expects, she wrote, would be an act of survival. The journal didn't point to guilt or victimhood. It read like someone teetering on the edge of two choices and not fully trusting either. Every September, on the anniversary of their disappearance, Brackenridge held a candlelight vigil. At first, it was organized by friends and neighbors. Over time, it became something larger. Schools added a moment of silence. A mural appeared downtown, abstract but unmistakable. A mother's hand reaching down toward a smaller one beneath a tree. Clara's final drawing, the one recovered in the woods, was framed and kept in the town library. It had been scanned and shared, used in awareness campaigns for missing persons. No words on it. Just those two figures beneath a simple curve of branches. The original remained locked away, sealed in an archival sleeve. People who saw it in person often lingered in front of it longer than they intended. Nathan, Veronica's former partner, rarely spoke to the press. But once, during a local podcast interview, he said, she believed she had more control than she did. Or maybe she knew she never had any to begin with. I don't think she ever stopped trying to protect Clara. That was always the one thing she wouldn't compromise. He attended every vigil but stayed near the back. Always alone. Rivera kept his case file open longer than protocol advised. He requested extensions, citing unresolved leads. In truth, it was personal now. He couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the drawing. Maybe it was Clara's line about trees telling secrets. Maybe it was the charm with Veronica's initials. Small things. Human things. Pieces of people left behind. He visited the clearing more than once. Not with teams. Not with press. Just with his notebook. Sometimes he stood there not writing at all. Just letting the silence settle. Trying to understand if this place had been a refuge, a trap, or something in between. He'd never say it out loud, but some part of him believed they had survived longer than anyone knew. That they might have had a plan. And that something, timing, trust, or interference, broke it. There was no evidence to prove it. But there was enough to keep the file from being closed. Rivera no longer kept the case file on the active board, but he hadn't filed it away either. It sat in a drawer just below his desk, marked with a single strip of blue tape. He'd gone over its pages so often he no longer needed the index. He knew exactly where each entry lived, which tab held the last known timeline, which envelope protected the drawing Clara left behind. There were days he thought about calling it, labeling it unresolved and turning it over to archives. But he never did. A small silver charm sat beside his notepad. He didn't keep it there for sentiment. He said it reminded him of the thin line between presence and absence. Veronica had once carried it for strength. Now it rested in a department drawer, separated from its meaning. He would replay certain moments in his mind, the photo of the figures heading into the woods, the marks in the clearing, Clara's words about trees holding secrets. None of them gave closure. But each one offered a different way to read the same silence. The case had no declared ending. No body. No confirmed suspect. Just theories that drifted across timelines like leaves in slow current. Did Veronica leave intentionally, to escape a system that wore her down and boxed her in? Did Lucas, fueled by past regret or buried rage, take control of something that was never his to begin with? Or was it something more fragmented? A decision layered in desperation, half-formed by both of them, carried out imperfectly, ending in consequences neither had prepared for? Every possible version left a piece behind. Rivera didn't favor one explanation over another anymore. The weight of the unknown wasn't a gap to him, it was a shape with its own edge. Veronica's journal remained sealed with the file. Clara's final drawing stayed locked in evidence. Yet Rivera sometimes thought the clearest message came not from words or sketches, but from what they left in the woods. The candle stub, the blanket, and the place where fire once burned. Brackenridge never fully moved on. The town didn't treat the story like folklore. It held on to it like an unfinished letter. The vigils continued. The mural remained untouched. Even those who never knew Veronica or Clara felt the stillness of their absence. An empty space that had somehow settled into the rhythm of the place. The public continued to speculate. Some clung to the theory that Veronica had started over under a new name. Others believed she never got the chance. A smaller group claimed Lucas had been seen in another county under a different identity. None of the claims ever held. No proof. No movement. Just a long pause that never lifted. Rivera once told a colleague, "Sometimes truth is a shadow. It lingers but it doesn't reveal." He never said more than that. The charm still rests beside his notebook. Some days he forgets it's there. Other days, he turns it over between his fingers and stares at the initials as if the metal might eventually give something back. It never does, but he keeps it anyway. Do you believe they vanished by choice, or by force? Share your thought in the comment section below.